Guys, we ready?
Ready. Go.
Hey, good people. It's been a minute since we did the Armchair Analysts, and we're back. Myself, Michael Kwambo, and Kibui Butt. Who is in the darkness? Why, Bana? You guy. Bana. You know what you do in the dark shall always come to light.
Let me just hide in my shape in the dark. I know places.
And then we do have Samuel Motari, and Samuel Motari making his debut on 254 Rugby. Samuel Motari, a bit of a CV. I'm going to embellish it kidogo. You know, Sami Motari, part of the Strathmore Leos teams of the previous decade. Went on to play for Impala and Nondis, but away from that, there's something that Sami Motari has over us, guys. Played for Shujaa. He was part of the squad that won Shujaa's only World Rugby 7 Series title to date, the 2016 Singapore Sevens.
Thanks.
And, you know, Sami Motari, great to have you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I played for 2 minutes of that tournament, so it was my debut tournament. Yeah, but I have the medal.
Minutes a minute. You have a cup.
Yeah, I did get.
You're the guys who pushed the starters to another position, so 100%.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
but now we have some questions because you. Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. You said you have some questions, so you can go ahead and ask them.
No, we have questions because we're having a discussion about the generations and the different eras of Kenya rugby. So we're here to have a discussion about it because I think we feel a certain way and you feel a certain way. So we're going to expound on this. As you played 7 Kenya too. So go.
Yeah. So absolutely, Sam, you can just tell us about your experience first of all. I know you played for 2 minutes, but just generally what it was like being in the setup, Strath, also Impala, Nondis, you know, you can just sum it up before we get into the conversation.
Well, I'm not a really old guy. I graduated high school class of 2010, then went to Strathmore from 2011, played Kenya under 19. First tournament was, I think that year we went to Zimbabwe, Harare. And at that time we were the second division, the lower tier. Then we won and brought the guys to the upper tier. The year before had been relegated to the second tier of the Car Cup. So after that, went to Strathmore. Nothing much happened during that period apart from, you know, Strathmore became competitive under Paul Odera. We got to 4th at the Kenya Cup. Then in the year 2013, we got to the final and lost to Nakuru at Kasarani. And I had a terrible game in that game, I remember. Other than that, we got to 2 semifinals, 2014, 2015 for the Kenya Cup. We were unfortunate, never won the Kenya Cup. So we were just finals and 2-time semifinalists. Then, of course, in a college setting, people graduate and move on to other clubs. At that point, I moved to Impala. But I made my debut for Simbas, Kenya versus Spain in the year 2015, first of all. So I played that game, then I got injured. Then after rehab, I got called to the Sevens. Then, you know, the environment was good at that point. This was my first full-time contract in the setup. I'd previously gotten call-ups, but then they were just, you know, you're part of the training squad, then you get dropped and all that. But this was the first full-time, and it was under Benja, which it was a great season. You know, there was good camaraderie in the team and all that. There was great support from the coaching staff, great support from the union at that time. Benja and the team always, you know, they were guys who would deal with all the politics and told the players, you know, you guys just play, you know. And that was great. And which culminated to the victory at that point. So before I head on to any other thing, I'll let my good old man Kibui tell us his experience of his times. We can then share our opinions and see, what happened over the years and the differences in the two experiences.
Yeah, as we were speaking, Kibui seems to have dropped off into the darkness, probably going to look for some light. Yeah, since it's just about talking about experiences, mine has been long and checkered. I picked up rugby in high school at Kakamega High School long before Kakamega High became a thing. We were already going for nationals, but reaching finals, never like really winning it. And I remember, joining club rugby at a point where players from Western Kenya were still being looked at funny, because the game was really concentrated around Nairobi and its environs. But we turned out to be decent players. Had a stint at Impala with the likes of Bilodongo, the likes of Zedia Kwanyi, Micho Chola, your former coach at Strathmore. I got a call up to the Kenya under-21s with Kibui. I was fortunate enough. I must say, rugby. I owe a lot to rugby, even though I gravitated to other fields. Getting to play for the Kenya under-21s, getting our passport at a time when it was hard. Those days, you for the regular Kenyan, you'd have to wait for nearly 6 months. But the letter from KRU worked wonders. Went to Zim, did the tour, came back, played the following season. I think that was the season that also saw the emergence of Dennis Mwanja. I saw Kibui tell a story about Dennis Mwanja, but Kibui also have a story to tell about Deno. I recall him busting onto the scene, and we were in U21 training, and you're trying to impress the coaches. You commit yourself into a tackle, and I remember Deno hit me so hard, I sat on my backside. When I stood up, I said, this guy, I'm never going to tackle him again in my career, and I'll always make sure I'm on the same team. So as fate would have it, when he plays for Ulinzi, I play for KCB, totally different spectrums. Thank goodness we united at KCB. So I had my stint at Impala. I must say I struggled to get first team ball, so I went to KCB. At KCB is where I broke out, was successful enough to win a few Kenya Cups. From there, retired into the world of media and communications. Took a long journey that eventually brought me back to rugby, and that's been my story. Kibui has been with us for a minute again popping in and out like a flanker on the line, before getting back into contact. But yeah, generally that was it. So it's been my journey, and writing about the game is something that comes almost like second nature to me, and it goes to a place where, despite my training in IT and HR, people only get, oh, bado unachezanga Rujo, you're still involved with the game. So I mean, basically that's it. When we were starting, we'll get Kibui to join us. When we were starting out, there was a picture I presented on the screen. The man is back. Let's get him before he disappears again. Kibui, we're just doing our introductions. This is like a chama where everybody's saying where they're from, what they've done, what crimes they've committed as well.
Okay. So I grew up in Nairobi. I went to St. Mary's School, Nairobi, a rugby powerhouse in the 80s and 90s. I never played a game of rugby for Saints second 15 or even, let alone first 15. I was a squash player. I was a swimmer, played football. Eventually had to play rugby because in Brookhouse we didn't have any players. So it was you have to play because you have to play. And picked up the game, learned it quickly, and just matured into a player that got a shot with the Quins. Toti came and on attachment from USIU. I think he had an attachment with Brookhouse, and he just told me, look, just come and try out. And the rest is history. 2 months later, I was in U21 camp with you guys after a tryout. For me, that's a highlight of my rugby career. Is early on, just because I got to play with all these phenomenal players who matured and went on to the next level. And looking back, I got to play with what I feel is like some of the Kenyan greats and against some of the Kenyan greats. And for me, I still reminisce about times in training and practice and games because it was an unforgettable time for me. So rugby means a lot to me, more than just a sport. Time when I had nothing, like I told you, rugby kept me sane. So for me, rugby is more than just a sport, and I know what it means for some other young people who have other challenges. So
Yeah.
that's my story in a nutshell.
Great. Now,
Wait,
there's some
Mike,
guys coming onto the screen. Yo, Sema.
it seems you and I are the Westerners. Kibui is a Saints guy. I've never
Yeah, Bana. Yeah, it's a guy of Saints, Nairobi, us, you guys of Kakamega. Kibui, by the way, let me tell you something before we get into this story.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys, it was hard, Bana, coming from Western. So you come to Nairobi, Bana, over the holidays. And you come to Nairobi over the holidays, and you have to now shift from that mode of Sheng to English. And you guys, it was hard because you can speak it, but there's more like tension. So you're like, you want to speak without looking like you've messed up your words because you really want to fit in. Now it would also get into the game because I remember many of my guys from Western gravitated towards Mwamba, Ulinzi, and KCB. Now for us guys, we lived on Gong Road, so that's how I ended up at Impala. So even in school, be called like a little punk, like a baby stuff. But now when you come, even when you go to Impala, Maze, you're just hearing you guys, banner. So you're trying to adjust your wavelength from Mini. It was hard, and then getting called up into these like situations. I remember getting called up in my first year. I think I was 18, just out of high school. Tank called up a Kenya under 23 squad. So there's a Kina Polodera, Nini. Them they're on that spectrum of 23. You guys are Nini. So as you just seeing guys, Kina Peter Goto, then you've gone to uni, USIU, there's the confidence. So guys are speaking, ask guys. So a guy comes and talks to you. Even saying yes, you have to think about saying yes. You're like, yes. So those are the experiences from back in the day. But yeah, the Westerners.
Tell us about the picture now, Kwambo.
Okay, now the picture. Well, this is 1986. This is the Hong Kong Sevens. There's a number of people we can identify in that picture. There's Max Muniafu, the late Jimmy Owino. The rest, but now we'll have to refer to our notes. Anyway, the significance of this picture is that this is the first representative Kenya Sevens side to play in an international competition. Now,
Ndeda was in that side, right?
Was he really? I'd have to revisit my.
That's they were banged like 17 nil in Hong Kong.
I think that was like slightly later.
Okay, maybe that was later. Yeah. Okay.
But by the fact that they were playing in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Sevens, this came about as a result of Watembezi pace setters. Watembezi, that's the next picture coming up on the screen. Watembezi was a touring side from Kenya. They played at the Dubai Sevens, and they were actually defending champions in Dubai 3 years in a row, I hear, between 1982 and 1985. And it attracted a lot of interest from these other guys who actually are like, what's going on, that hey, these guys can actually push ball. And they found out they're from Kenya and got the invites. So that's the reason I was bringing it up, because for us to tell a story, we need to at least know where we're coming from. So these are the guys who started it all. Of course, there's the guys who planted the seeds and everything. So a few years later, getting to play a number of tournaments, Safari Sevens comes up. But let's take it to 1999 when the World Rugby 7 Series takes place for the first time. Kenya gets an invitation to 2 legs in South Africa and Dubai. And there used to be an invitational side, but prior to that, in 1998, they were one of the sides that played at the Commonwealth Games, the inaugural Rugby Sevens tournament in Malaysia. And one of the games they famously lost was to Fiji, 71-0. If you talk to Akina Pablo, they tell you that story. They were just holding hands on hips at every restart, and they couldn't fathom how they've conceded 71 points in 14 minutes. So that's what gets our story going. For me, that was the pioneering class of Kenya Sevens. Sami Mots bana we sijui tutakwambia aje. Yeah.
The only knowledge I have is what Mitch told me about their trip to Mar del Plata, Argentina. So that's where my history starts from.
So I actually wrote an article when I used to write back in the day about that the tournament in Mar del Plata and the qualification up to it. And if we're talking about squads and sides and whether those guys would fit into this, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Because you go look at that squad, you know, Tony Ongoro, a bustling center who was playing at hooker. You look at, you know, Toti, Oscar Triple O, who could he could slot into any side he wanted to, as far as I'm concerned. In any Kenya Sevens, you know, Triple O, you have Mitch, you have Kanye Gitonga, an underrated, very unsung hero at 10 for Mean Machine, Nondis, and for Kenya. That guy was electric. He had the pace, he had the guile, he had the nous. And for me, probably one of the guys who doesn't get talked about enough in Kenyan rugby history. So.
Yeah, then also throw in Kennedy Aswani. Kennedy Aswani was like an interesting guy because he looked languid, he looked windy, like one of those guys who's like, you know, this guy, if I get him, I just even, you know, I can slap him and he's you know, he's out of action. But slippery, had just enough pace to beat the gap. And I mean, that was just part of like that initial squad. So on the screen, I was trying to pull up this photo. This is the Watembezi pace setters. Winning the Dubai Sevens 3 years in a row. Young guys, they're the likes of Max Muniafu. And it's also important to note that there's a Harambee Stars international, JJ Masiga, who made his name in both rugby and soccer, who was part of those squads. You can see him squatting to the right there. And I mean, just shows you how multi-talented the rugby players of back then were. But we're trying to stick to the script. So we've been talking about that squad from the from the early days. And yeah, so there's that. So Shuja get invited to the World Rugby Series. I recall 2000 thereabouts, you know, they literally would just go. 2001, they qualified for the Rugby World Cup. That was during the Safari Sevens tournament held in Nairobi in 2000. They lost to Zimbabwe in the final, 24-15, 26-15. I can't remember, but anyway, they go to Argentina, and in Argentina they pull off a shock win against France, 12-7. You know, and so you know guys start noticing. Then the following year, 2002, there's Commonwealth Games. Now, Commonwealth Games, the squad is transitioning. We've got guys like Dennis Mwanja on the scene, Bilodongo. There's a guy we didn't mention, but Sydney Obonyo, Black Rose. Yeah, these are the guys who were, you know, in the squad back then. And now this is the squad that is now heading out to the Commonwealth Games. And at the Commonwealth Games, they shock Samoa. Steve Gishuki's in the squad by then. They shock Samoa 28-20 in one of the games. Of course, they don't like go to the cup competition, but that's a statement. So just looking at that group of players, what's your memory of that group of players? Mots, we're coming to you.
Okay. So when you ask me about a memory about those guys, I barely know those guys. Maybe I've seen those guys.
In standard 6.
2000 and yes.
You're in standard 6 or 7.
Graduated high school,
2010.
primary school, 2006. So 2006
he was in
ndio
standard
nilikuwa
6.
class 8. Huh?
Tulikuwa tunashinda Kenya Cup ya pili la KCB.
At that time, to be honest, I didn't know anything about rugby. My first rugby match that I watched was around 2004, actually. Ilikuwa aired on NTV. Impala was playing Queens at Queens. That was the first game of rugby I watched. And what I saw was very big men running at each other. And I thought, wow, that is cool. I probably would like to learn this game. It looks cool, you know? I was an athletic kid, always quick, you know? So I figured, okay, that's what the first game that piqued my, you know, interest with this sport. So at that point, I didn't know any of these guys. If you ask me about Black Rose, I've just seen Black Rose playing touch at Queens, because by the time I was seeing him at Queens, that was 2011, and by then he was coaching, I think. So Toti has coached me. Who else? Mitch has coached me at under 20. Dennis Mwanja, I've played against him when he was in his sunset years. So that was enjoyable, to say the least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
enjoyable in what way? There's a way sometimes you get hit and say, hey, yeah, this guy, I see why they call him Iron Man. And there's also enjoyable, probably new running rings around him,
It was enjoyable in enjoyable in that the only person who could play in any similar semblance to how Dennis Mwanja played was Andrew Omonde. Like those hard running lines, when Dennis was in his sunset years, you're saying, okay, who else can replicate this? I think only Andrew can. Oscar Uma probably did. Those are the guys that are of my generation that I can talk of. But not to take anything from the older guys, they did their time. They set the pace for our generations to come. So you guys know more about them than I would probably say. But for sure, from the pictures that you've shown us, there were specimens of athletes.
Absolutely. Kibui will be joining us in a few minutes, just, sorting out something. Now, 2003, I think, of course, Shujaa have now played at the Commonwealth Games a year earlier. They've caused some ripples, they've shocked the likes of Samoa. The world is noticing. And World Rugby 2003 decide to throw another bone to Shujaa and invite them to a third leg of the World Series, which is Hong Kong Sevens. Now, at this time, remember, Dennis Mwanja's burst onto the scene. The likes of Alan Makaka also bursting onto the scene. Newton Ongalo, former Kenya Sevens team manager, also bursting onto the scene. Innocent Simiu and Victor Sudi as well. Of course, Benja, Toti are still in that squad. Anyway, they go to Hong Kong and they claim another scalp, this time in the form of Australia. They defeat Australia 15-12. They top their pool. They reach the cup quarters. And remember, this is an invitational side. I'd liken it to like Seventh Circuit, our local circuit, where let's give an example of Mount Kenya University, Nairobi, and they decide they're going to Driftwoods and boom, they're in the semis. So basically, that's the same kind of impact that it had. So at the end of that season, and then, of course, also these people have realized, World Rugby have realized that there's the vibe that the Kenyans bring, both on the field because they were crowd favorites, and in the stands because of the vibrant nature of the Kenyan people and their fans. So in 2004, affirmative action from World Rugby, Shujaa is now made a core side on the World Series. Of course, they what can I say? They motor through those years. There's a lot of transitioning. Benja, Oscar, Toti are getting into their sunset years, but there's more players coming up now. The Mwanjas of this world are coming up. There's quite a number of players who were in and out at that point. But the transitionings are also happening because Bill Githinji had taken over from Tank Otieno. Bill Githinji is replaced, I think, by Gordon Anampiu, then by Edward Rombo, and then now Benja is appointed coach. So this is the first transition now that we're seeing of a player who actually took the squad to the series, becoming a coach. And so now the late 2000s, probably that will be something that can jog your memory. I'll even bring up a picture here just for more recognition. I'm sure these are guys that you can see: Sydney Ashoya, Collins Injera,
Gibson
Now these are the players who've come through, and of course Benja as the head coach. And Benja was a different kind of coach, totally different from the more robust, taciturn coaches that we've had in the past. The kind who all business, and they don't like jokes. So this is Benja. He talks to you, finds out how you're doing and everything, and he's bringing this to the players. Around that time, things are also changing. I think this is the first squad around 2007 to now have a dedicated conditioning coach, because before that, how we used to get onto the pitch was you're lucky you played at a time when scientific levels of coaching and conditioning had hit Kenya rugby. Because Kitambo, it was you get onto the pitch when you go for training, you have to do 5 laps, and then I don't know for 10s, I don't know what. just a lot of stuff. Literally, your own conditioning coach. Gym ilikuwa ni wewe, you know. So it gets to a point where Geoffrey Kimani comes on board. He's the conditioning coach, and he's beginning to get these players into specimens. So now we have this squad. We begin seeing them progress, and in their progress, they start making statements here. They defeat New Zealand. They start defeating, South Africa. They run Fiji close. 2009, they qualify for the Rugby World Cup. That's the third Rugby World Cup sevens that they're qualifying for. And this time, with the local training technical bench, they reach the semis of the Rugby World Cup sevens. And at that time, their conditioning is at par, if not better than the world beaters. And then, obviously, from Benja, we have now Mike Friday. Again, more transitioning of players. Now, this is when we have the likes of Kina Oscar Uma coming through, William Baka, Andrew Amonde. And then now we progress. Then you guys come on board. And then I'm sure now you're familiar with the likes of, Kina Willie, Collins Injera, even maybe, I'd say probably Tony Omondi, Vincent Onyala, up to then. And you can see things change. Now, taking it back, I remember the conversation that we were having on WhatsApp, and it was after that video was shared in terms of like if any of the players from the previous generation would fit into would play at the same optimal levels in this day and age.
Yeah, so you rightfully called the class of 2004 to 2010 the breakthrough era, because that's when a lot of stuff was changing, and so to speak, like you mentioned, the first player transitioned to a coach in the environment, which is in the best way, the best form of continuity that you can have for any team. I'll relate that to what has happened to the US recently when they appointed Zach Test as the new Sevens head coach, and that, in my opinion, is the best thing that could happen to USA Sevens, because now they have their own person who understands the culture, the environment, and everything. So that kind of thing can really help the environment move from, a point of things not working to a point where things are actually working. But those gains will only get you to a certain point. Those gains get to a point where, in science, we call them a point of diminishing returns, where now you have to bring expertise. You have to bring that third eye to tell you, hey, yes, you may think that everything is rosy, but you can do this and your thing will become better. You can do this and your thing will become better, right? So, like, before we even talk about how if the breakthrough era would survive in the current generation, let's talk about the changes that happened when Benja took over. You said he onboarded a strength and conditioning coach. For the first time ever, we didn't look like we were tired in games, and we even got to the semifinals of a Rugby World Cup. All great steps, right? And of course, this comes from a point of exposure. Traveling out there, he sees what other teams are doing. Then you either shape up or, you get left behind. Other teams are traveling with parties of... I remember when I actually traveled my first time with Shuja. Shuja typically travels with head coach, assistant coach, physio, strength and conditioning, I think 4? No, and team manager, 5. 2 of these are not paid for by World Rugby. World Rugby basically pays for the head coach, 1 coach, physio, and the team manager. So the assistant coach and strength and conditioning, that's up to the union to take care of that. So at our best, when we've had local coaches, we've had 5 at the technical. When we had foreign coaches, we'll talk about that later. Always that their budget was always bloated. So when you see South Africa travel, they travel with a team of up to 10. And this is just technical. They will have a doctor. They will have, two physios, they will have a kit man, they will have all these things, but you have to come back to the environment that you're working in and figure, okay, what do we have? What can we work with, right? So again, bringing that third eye helped Kenya move from one point to the other. So once whatever happened, when everything was going well, Benja's led us to the World Cup in 2009, again, got to the semis. Then he gets sacked, right? Then we bring on Mitch. Again, that's a transition. Now, at this point, other teams are doing serious building of this is how we play, this is how we do our things. But Kenya now goes back to rebuilding. We have new players who are bringing on board. We bring now things of, we want to contract players, we want to pay them, we want them full time, because the golden era, they could be able to maintain their jobs, get time off, and still play for Shuja. Then now we are at a point where the series has become so competitive that you have to be there full time. You need more time at training. If you want to be competitive, you need more time. You need more resources. You need to be paid so that you stay active in the environment and be competitive. But if you rock the environment and bring another coach and players decide to down their tools, players who you would have had in the environment to maintain that continuity, then it brings you down, right? It brings the environment down and you have to rebuild again. So time and again, every time we've sacked a coach, we've had to rebuild again. So before I go further, I don't know if Kibui wants to chime in on what my observations are, because I see we have him now.
Yeah, thanks for your patience, guys. I think I found a spot where at least I can talk without any interruptions. But I think talking about Zach Test and continuity, sometimes you also just need to hear a new voice, right? Sometimes you get so used to just the way you're being coached, and sometimes just the slight change and nuance from a different voice can give you lift. It maybe make you more receptive to gameplay or strategy, and so you talk about transition, you talk about Benja moving on to Mitch, and maybe I wasn't in the system, guys who played in the system, everybody I know loved playing for Benja, but maybe at some point with all the wrangling and everything, sometimes you just need to hear a new voice. I still think that we've shown that our Kenyan coaches are good enough to compete at the next level, given the resources. And you look at what Bling is doing right now. You look at what Benja did in different stints, 3 or 4 different stints. Mitch, Namkos, his first season was great, and then he kind of fell off after that. And maybe Mike, we can maybe get Namkos to give us input on that sometime in the future, right? Because he was there and he lived it. He had one stellar season, and then the next season it all went wrong. And perhaps he's still doing a postmortem on that season. Sometimes you second guess yourself, because you look back and you say, hey, we didn't really do anything that was so different, but what changed? What caused us to drop off as drastically as we did? But I think one of the things that started this discussion was, could the guys from the original era, that starter era, survive in this setup? And I think conditioning is one thing you brought up. And I think any good athlete, when exposed to conditioning, even if it's 3 or 4 months, your levels will rise, right? Consistency, just having that commitment in that time, whereas you're a full-time worker who's commuting to, sometimes you're not even driving to RFUA, right? Some of those guys were, they were javoing. They were javoing to RFUA, and then you have to fight to get back home at 8:30 at night, go back to town, then go to work. There's no way you can compete with somebody who's in a semi-pro, because it's still semi-pro, it's still an amateur union, but you still had more allowances, and at least most of the guys are probably driving to and from. You have time off from work, or maybe you don't even work full-time, because most of the guys in the squad are younger guys. So you can give that time and that commitment to your craft, the time to watch video, the time to watch, the time to spend in the gym, the time to recover. You know, you look back at our time, we had no time to recover. I remember I'd come off like my knee injuries and it'd be like, okay, you're back to starting. I'm like, boss, I just came back from an injury. My body can't take me going and playing. And sometimes those guys had to run through that just because the quality between 1 through like 10 and then the next set of guys, the drop off was so vast at that time. But now we have a solid pool and a solid pool that, you know, Sam, Motari, you've been in that setup where you've been pulled up, you train with those guys, and you're told, okay, thanks, but we don't need you for this tour. But you had the exposure, you had a baseline to work from.